we'd be parked somewhere that we're not even sure we could sleep, and my parents would be like counting $1 bills to see if they could fill the gas tank to get us to the next location.
Hello and welcome back, or even better, welcome for the first time if that applies to you. This is that part of the show where I talk about sponsors. I'm so lucky because I have no agenda on this show to make money or promote anything personally. For me, it's just about having fun, sharing stories, and building connections between communities through the people in them. So when it comes to sponsors, I just support people I love and trust, and the people supporting the show do it because they see value in the show. So do consider giving them some love next time you're in the market. One of the sponsors of the show today is Four Corners Riversports. Four Corners Riversports is located in Durango, Colorado. They're a full-service paddle sports retail and rental store. If you're looking to get on the water, look no further than Four Corners Riversports. Call them at 970-259-3893 or visit their website at www.riversports.com. They really are a true core paddle shop, and you won't go wrong no matter what you want to do. This episode is also sponsored by Taylor Barker with the group real estate Steamboat. I've known and paddled with Taylor for years, and he brings passion to everything he does. Steamboat Springs is a wonderful town with the Yampa River running right through it and has a vibrant and friendly boating community. If you're thinking of making a move to the Steamboat area or purchasing a vacation home, be sure to get in touch with Taylor. He's happy to give you a lay of the land, the real estate market, and to help find the perfect property for you. You can reach him at 336-314-4353 or by email at taylor@brokerintheboat.com. And I'm sure as a bonus, if you want a guide down Gore, he's your man. You can find all these links in the show notes. This podcast is also being featured on paddlinglife.com. Paddlinglife.com does a wonderful job of finding all the most interesting happenings in the world of paddling and bringing them straight to you in the form of news, interviews, articles, videos, and more. You can be sure if there's something interesting that happened yesterday in the world of kayaking, you can find it on paddlinglife.com. So check it out, paddlinglife.com. All right, you're in for a treat today. Let's get the show going. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Crips, a whitewater storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Cripps. If you're not familiar with the name of my guest today, it's quite possible you've accidentally tuned into the wrong podcast, or alternatively, you may be my mother. But for consistency, I better do an intro anyway. My guest today is a multi-time world freestyle kayak champion. She's a co-owner of one of the biggest brands in whitewater kayaking. She, her husband, and two kids star in their own travel television show. Many years before she was old enough to drive, she lived in a van down by the river, well before there was even a hashtag for that. She is a member of probably the most well-known family in the world of whitewater kayaking. And most importantly, she's here today to help me fill my quota for more women on the podcast. That's a joke, by the way. But I'm very grateful she's taking the time out of her busy schedule to talk with me today. Welcome to the show, Emily Jackson.
Oh, that might have been one of the best intros for me I think I've ever heard. Nice work. That was
All right,
solid.
maybe we should quit now while I'm ahead. You want to just wrap it
Yeah,
up right
that's
here?
good. Yeah,
Call it
okay.
good.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
No, that was
where
great.
do we find you today, Emily?
Yeah, well,
You're known for traveling around.
yeah, I mean, we travel full time. Today I am in White Salmon, Washington. But I don't go home till November, so I'm about to drive to Calgary and then Wisconsin. So life on the road. Yeah, busy, busy.
Nice. Sounds like a good time to be traveling, though. Summer's always
Oh,
nice to be out and about.
is there such
Yeah.
thing as a bad time to be traveling? I mean, let's be
Oh.
real. Every time is a good time to be traveling. So,
Touche. Well,
yeah.
I gotta like kick things off here to tell you that when I go kayaking sometimes, people ask me about like, oh, what's next on the podcast, or maybe they have some suggestions for me of like, oh, you should get this person on. So maybe it's because I just had Anniel on, and so like people are getting overly excited. But someone the other day was like, oh, you need to get Dan Jackson on the podcast, and I was like, well, and then I think someone else even kicked in, oh, you need to talk to EJ. I was like, well, I've actually been working on getting Emily on the podcast. I think like you don't even hear from her as much as these other people. I think she's got some interesting stuff. And they were kind of like, oh yeah, I guess so,
Yeah.
like does she do 100-foot waterfalls? I don't know, and
It's
I was like very disappointed by that response. So I'm throwing down the
Hey,
gauntlet right now. We need to
yeah,
prove
no,
them
for
wrong.
sure. No, 100%. I mean, for the record, I taught Dane how to roll, so everything, I take a little credit for that one for sure. But
If
no,
it
of
was if it
course, I
wasn't for
think,
you, he wouldn't be.
yeah, no, if it wasn't for me, yeah, definitely. So, no, 100%. I mean, in general, I definitely grew up whether it's like, oh, you're EJ's daughter, and for a while, there was a moment, where I was kicking Dane's butt. And then quickly it turned into, you're Dane's sister. And I love it. I mean, I totally embrace it 100%. But a lot of their success, I think comes from how close knit our family is. Like, my dad and my brother and my husband Nick and myself have the biggest cheering squads and support system. And I've always been a little bit more like the motherly hen. I'm not throwing myself off 100-foot waterfalls because someone has to be there to pick up all the pieces and deal with all the adult things. So, I mean, that's a little bit of it too. It's just like I'm definitely their support system and support crew. But at the same time, I've carved a lot of space on my own to, while adulting aggressively, solidify, some pretty big titles out there. So good stuff for sure.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. Well, I want, since this is purportedly a whitewater storytelling podcast, and since we're going to try to prove some people wrong that you have some pretty awesome adventures under your belt,
So
like
many.
let's try kicking it off with a few travel stories,
Uh,
because
Okay. Is there one you have in mind? Because we kind of went through a couple. Is there one that, in general, I mean, I grew up traveling. I have so many, like from childhood all the way through. So is there a particular time frame that you're looking for? Or, I mean, it could be a
yeah,
book.
it could be a book. You threw out a couple Africa stories that sounded pretty wild.
Yeah.
Like the kidnapping one that sounded pretty crazy.
Oh,
So
yeah.
how
Yeah,
about we kick
definitely.
things off with that?
Oh, kidnapping story. Yeah, no, for sure. So, every year my family just about goes to Africa for kayaking. And in Uganda, you ride these little motorcycles. They're called like bodas. And you would finish this section of river on the Nile River in Uganda. And at the takeout, you'd have these bodas pick you up and they would shuttle you back to your lodging. And I was like 14 at the time. We had just got done running the day one section of the Nile River, and a section that no longer exists actually because the river's been dammed. So we visited every year until the dam happened. And one of the last days, it was getting really dark, because we were milking every drop of water, knowing that this section is going to be dammed. And the boda drivers picked us up, but I didn't like to go as fast, as my dad and my brother and Nick. And so often I would tell the boda drivers to slow down, and I would end up in the back of the pack. Well, this time I had a new boda driver that I'd never been with before, and I asked him to slow down, and we were in the back of the pack. But then we took a totally different turn and I kept saying, "Oh, like, are we going a different way? Where are we going?" And he just like stopped talking to me, no talking anymore, dead silent. And I was like, "Where are we going? Like, what's happening?" And now we drove far. Like, this is like 20, 30 minutes down a mud road, like barely even a road, to his hut where three other men were waiting. And when I got there, they like took my boat off the boda, took my life jacket, my spray skirt, my paddle, and they were like rummaging through all my stuff. And I was like, "What are you looking for? Can I help you?" Like trying to be really polite as if I'm not just getting like totally abducted. And like, "Can I help you find something? Like, what's going on?" Like acting really innocent. And then they were like rummaging through my polypro, just looking for money. They were just looking for my money. And at 14, I was just like, okay, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here. Do I start running? But I wasn't really in a position to do so. And now it's like dark and I'm in the middle of nowhere in Uganda, no phones, nothing like that of the sort. And yeah, so I told them, I was like, if you're looking for money, like I don't have any, but my dad has so much money at our hut. And I can, like, if we get
Mm,
back to my lodging, he'll pay you whatever you want if you can just get me back safe. I just need to get back. Like, I don't have any money on me, but my dad has so much money, which is a bit of a lie, but at the same time, I was like, okay, they're money motivated. Let's get them. I was like, I'll pay you all of our money if you just get me back. And they were clearly frustrated because I didn't have anything on me. So then they kind of like, they were arguing, and a guy puts me back on the boda, and then we start driving, but now I have no idea. And we got back, and the second we got back, all the boda drivers just ripped this guy off the bike, and we're beating the living shit out of him. The poor guy. I mean, I'm not like that, not
Whoa.
that poor guy, but I just remember being like, he got me back. I ran through the gates, got to my lodging, and then it really dawned on me the whole thing that happened. I was like, what would happen if I did have money? It's just one of those like crazy travel
Yeah.
stories of staying calm and collected sometimes can go a really long way. I'm glad it didn't end different at all, but I don't think they ever would have hurt me in any way. But at the same time, they clearly really wanted money and Mzungus. White people are usually can be at times a target for that for sure. But
Hmm.
all other experiences in Uganda generally have been nothing short of incredibly hospitable. So every once in a while something like that can happen, but this one turned out fine. But it was a pretty harrowing experience as a young teenage girl. So pretty freaked me
But
out, that's for sure. Yeah.
did you have some like trauma afterwards? I mean, did you
No,
sleep that
my
night
whole
or?
life,
Yeah.
childhood has a lot of things where people could label as trauma. I think all of us, because our realities are all the same. Like we all have our own realities. So like the worst things that have happened to us would be our trauma. And so like
Hmm.
different, you can't validate which trauma is more than other trauma. And so for me, growing up, my dad was framed for murder at one point. I've watched like
What?
so many different, oh yeah, like
I
different
didn't know about
in
that.
France. Yeah, we can tell you that story too. But there's so many stories of like growing up of these like crazy scenarios, like my father being so adventurous. The big lessons that my parents taught me was, staying calm and collected is the most important. But then on top of it, you can choose that everything was traumatic and that you're a victim, or you can just like reframe it in your head that it's like a learning experience. And so we got a lot of learning experiences, a lot of them growing up.
I
So
guess
yeah,
so. Did anybody
yeah.
talk? Did any of the other drivers or anybody talk to you about that afterwards? Like, did they
Yeah, like it
come
became
in?
like a famous story in the area about like well, one, the guy wasn't even from there, so he like met them at the takeout and was like posing as one.
Oh wow.
And so the whole thing, like he wasn't a boda driver at all. And so that was like mistake number one. But then after that, like I used the same driver for the next, 15 years. I'd be like, Steve Boda is my driver. I'm using Steve Boda every time I go now. So now I just stay away from the motorcycles because that's how all the kayakers get hurt there. But at the same time, yeah, I use the same drivers, so it's good. It helps out a lot. So I learned my lesson. That was my lesson, know who your drivers are. So
Yeah,
yeah,
pays to have the connection, I guess.
yeah,
That's wild.
yeah.
Well,
But
I
if you
mean,
want to add on to the craziness of that story, we had a driver that we trusted driving our car because the cars there were even sketchy. And on my birthday, we were kayaking, and my driver decided that he would take a swim, and he ended up drowning. And I came back to my car to like leave the river, and these little kids, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was barely spoke English. They're like, "Your driver's dead," and I'm like, "What?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I remember it vividly because it was also my birthday, and I'm like, "I don't understand." And they're like, "Oh, he died," and they're like, "Probably
what?
crocodile," and I'm like, "Wait, what?" Like this is like so
What?
many. I was like, "There's not even crocodiles like in this area," and they're like, "Well, he's gone," and they were so calm, and I'm like freaking out. I'm like starting to like panic. I'm like, "Oh my God, where's the driver?" And I go down to the river, and his clothes were folded on the banks, and the kids were all just super calm, like he's gone, like just crazy how much exposure they have to death at a young age there. So they weren't in like panic mode. They weren't saying anything at all. So he was my favorite driver, but he doesn't drive me anymore. So I've had to learn to get another driver that I trust. But pretty crazy, like just this wild. Africa in general, the continent. You're exposed to so many things, and it's pretty aggressive. So in
That
a
is
beautiful way
crazy.
as well. Yeah,
Did
yeah.
you ever find out what actually happened to him, or is it
Yeah, he
like
was
nobody
hot and
actually
he went
knows?
in the water and he drowned. Yeah.
He
They
like
found
he
his
just
body. Yeah.
he
Yeah.
just got into some
Most of them
current and
can't
he couldn't get out.
swim. Yeah. Yeah. Most of
Really?
them can't swim, and yeah, they can't swim there. And then on top of it, they underestimate the current. So what happens is the Nile is a massive river, and it looks calm on the surface, but the whole thing's moving really fast. So most
Right.
likely he got hot, waiting, went to cool off. saw kids swimming because some of the children swim around there. I thought, oh, I could do this too, and like got in the water and then was swept away. So yeah, they
Oof.
did find his body later, so it was confirmed that he did drown. At the river. That's pretty crazy. But
Yeah,
enough
God.
crazy Africa like chaos because there's just so much there. You could keep going down the chaos of all my Africa travel stories, but it's good. Yeah, it's all good. So.
Apparently. Well, I mean, you just teed us up for your dad getting framed for murder, so maybe you have to
Oh,
tell
okay.
that.
You want to hear about how my dad got framed for murder? That was in France. My dad was racing slalom, and he decided that he would go to this festival. It was a fireworks festival, and towards the evening, my dad was like, "Okay, I'm gonna hit on this chick." This is before he married my mother, and he's like, I'm gonna hit on her." And he's like talking to her, and she was super aggressively turned him down. My dad was like, "There was no chance." She like wasn't even remotely interested, and my dad never says that. So he had no chance. And so he went home. And then the next morning, this van came, and these two gentlemen came out, and they said, Eric Jackson. And he's like, yeah. And they're like, get in the car. And he's like, okay, doesn't even question it, just gets in the car, no idea what's going on. And they drive him like a while away to the top of this mountain. And then in the whole time, they don't say a word to him. And now he's like, oh my God, I just got kidnapped. And he gets to the top of the mountain, and these two gentlemen start like talking to him. And they say, your name's Eric Jackson. And he said, yes. And they said, you took this girl home. And he was like, no, I tried, but she didn't want to. And they held up a photograph. And like, no, we know that you took her home last night. And my dad was like, trust me, I tried. She said no. And they're like, well, we saw you take her home last night. And he's like, no, I didn't. And they like argue in French. And then he gets a little confused. He's like, I don't know what's going on. My dad's pretty young at the time. And then they hand him a gun in a velvet box. And he recognizes um, that they're at a firing range. So he's like, well, if I hold the gun, then at least I've got a gun now, I'm safe. It's a safety thing. So my dad picks up
Whoa.
the gun, and they're like, come shoot with us. And he's like, what? And he goes and he shoots targets at these two French guys that practically kidnapped him. And then as soon as he fired off 2 rounds, they take the gun and they put it back in the box, and they put it in the car, and they drive him back to his campground. And he gets to the campground. He's like, they're super nice guys. Yeah, they thought I took this girl home, and then we shot some targets at this firing range. It was just the three of us. Not a big deal. Like, I don't know how they knew me or my name or anything, but it all worked out. I'm back, and there's like slightly more mature people in the campground. They're like, EJ, were the guys wearing gloves? And they're like, yeah, everyone was wearing gloves. And they're like, were you wearing gloves? And he's like, no, I wasn't wearing gloves. And my dad was like, so. And so they connected the dots on everything that went down. And my dad someone drove him across the border that day, and he was scared to return to France for a long time. But apparently that girl did disappear, but nothing got linked back to him at that point. But my mom was really scared to go back to France with him because she was worried. I mean, he did fire a gun off that was probably used if anything was ever found. So, but yeah,
That is
I mean,
insane.
literally, my dad in general, he's lived such a life of adventure because he says yes to everything. I mean, who says yes to some random two French dudes but wearing gloves and a minivan in the mountains of France to drive them off? No one does that. But my whole childhood was my father saying yes. And I actually remember thinking like, oh my God, am I going to survive this childhood? And for Dane, I was so protective over him that often I'd be like, guys, like to my parents, like, this is not appropriate. We should not be doing this with Dane. Like, this is dangerous. And they'd be like, okay, that's a good point, Emily. We won't do this. But they were so open to saying yes to adventure that we spent a lot of my childhood just doing crazy but awesome things. Like, I could die tomorrow and I feel like I've lived 1,000 times over simply due to the fact that, that whole leap and the net will appear. Well, I'm trying to leap a little bit while like weaving a net on the back end, but my dad is a full leaper, and it's really embraced a awesome life of organized chaos. So, yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
yeah, that's very unique. And I guess we we've kind of like already led into one of the topics that I wanted to talk about. I guess it's just
Yeah.
like so intertwined with who you are that it's impossible not to, which is kind of like
Yeah.
what is it to be, growing up in the Jackson family
Oh goodness, yeah.
and
Well, it depends which of the kids you ask, So, Dane and I see it differently a little bit, but as far as
mm,
growing up as a Jackson, the biggest thing was resourcefulness and then like embracing every day are like the two things that stand out the most. So,
mm,
and pursuing things that you're passionate about. So I lived in Washington, D.C. My dad was pursuing slalom, and we had the house, and I went to the school with my friends until first grade, I think it was done. And my parents were not happy. My mom just, we never had enough money. My dad, every minute that he had free time, he was gone. And he would always say, like, what the priorities were, and like Dane and I, like his kayaking was like the number one priority, and my mom's number one priority was my brother and I, and that was just how the household worked. My dad clearly loved me dearly, but at the same time, I mean, when he would go do a slalom workout, there have been times where he'd put me in overalls and hang me from a doorknob and go do his slalom workout and come back. And when my brother Dane was born, he was on the water doing
wait a minute,
slalom.
wait a minute. Is that figurative or is that literal?
Oh no, it's 100%. Like there's like my
Like he,
mom, yeah,
he
yeah.
actually
Oh
would
yeah,
hang you from a doorknob.
I had overalls on, so I was like hanging in overalls. Yeah, is his way of making one of those jumpers. But so when you look back at it, I'm like, man, it's like kind of a batshit crazy childhood. But at the same time, my dad was so like determined to like make his dream work, and so like he worked so hard constantly. And DC was just not working. Like you need a lot of money to live there, and we had none. And so my parents were like on the verge of splitting or making a major change. And so that's when the RV came about in 1998. So I was 8 years old at the time. They met another kayaker that just lived out of an RV full time. And instead of like, maybe they planned a little bit, but that's not how I remember it. Basically, my parents said, we're going to move into an RV. And I was like, I was sad because I was going to lose my friends. But then they didn't empty the drawers in the house. They just put an ad in the paper, and literally every dime. So like people came running into our house and would open like the silverware drawer and like ask, how much do you want for the forks? And like our clothing drawers, like, and my parents to like prep for this, they gave us each one like tub, like one Tupperware like tub that we could like put the things that were most important to us in, and everything else had to go. And so I just remember like watching kids like take my bike and go down the street, and like people
What?
with like the coffee maker, and my mom being like, do you think you could pick up the coffee maker tomorrow afternoon so I can have coffee in the morning? Like it was definitely wild, when you think about it. But this was just a great insight into like my parents had a dream, and it was like buying an RV, but there was like no chance. So they were like, this is the only way to do it. And if they had started going through things, they'd have been picking and choosing. It would have been harder. It would have made less money, but they just committed. And so like within like a pretty tight turnaround, the house was emptied and they had the cash they needed. They went to a dealership, they bought us an RV and the dogs, and we jumped in. And then I lived in that full time with my parents, traveling from kayaking event to kayaking event. And it was such a unifying moment because one, it's like my mom started laughing again. And
Mm,
my dad and hers relationship was just so loving and supportive
mm,
versus, bitter or resentful. And then on top of it, Dane and I just got to see just like how dedicated my father was to his kayaking. Like first, and
mm,
I became really proud of his endeavors and who he was and what he was trying
mm,
to accomplish, because I got to see the hard work now too. I was with him at his training, I was with him at the competitions.
mm,
And there's something wild about not being able to shut a door when you're having an argument. There's
mm.
something pretty crazy about growing up, being 14 years old with a 12-year-old brother and not having a door to slam on him when you're frustrated. You have to work things
Yeah,
out. There's a lot
that's
more open
interesting.
communication. We definitely broke things, we caused mass chaos, but we did everything together. Like, I don't know any family that spent the amount of minutes that my family has, and then the things that we had to overcome as a family, because resources were very tight. We would be we'd be parked somewhere that we're not even sure we could sleep. And my parents would be like counting $1 bills to see if they could fill the gas tank to get us to the next
Wow.
location just to see if he could get there so he could teach kayaking for a few days, get money to go to the next place. And then on top of it, we would get free food from fast food joints because my dad would walk in and be like, "What are you going to do with all the food when you close in like an hour?" So we'd go
Really?
at nighttime and they would be like, "Well, we have to throw out some or some we donate." And he'd be like, "Is there any chance before you're throwing it out, I'll wait till closing and then you can just give me all the food?" Or like his favorite, because it'd be hot too, was return pizza. So like people ordered their pizza wrong and it was like on top of the oven. My dad would go from pizza place to pizza place and be like, "So are those return pizzas or what are those?" "Yeah, they're returns." Like, "Can I have them?" And they'd be like,
Wow.
"Yeah." So
He
it
had all the
just
tricks.
oh, he has all the tricks, but it's the resourcefulness that's just crazy. It's mind-boggling to me. Like so many people don't have that today because they're like, "Oh, I can't do that because of XYZ." And I was like, watching my father overcome all of that was wild. And then getting to see him push his kayaking, not only push his kayaking, but become world champion for freestyle kayaking, was really cool. As a kid, you're just like, wow, like if you work that hard and you get creative to come up with solutions, like you can really go far. Like, doesn't
You
matter
learn,
what you have
yeah.
stacked against you.
You
Yeah.
learned early on that connection between putting in the work and time and getting the result, huh?
100%. And so then I became a really hard worker at a very young age. I started selling milkshakes at all the events in the RV, and I would sell them to the kayakers. And there were multiple times in my life. For example, my parents blew all four tires on the RV, and we were stranded in Arizona with no money, no cash, no nothing to get anywhere. And I had my little purple box with the key, and I unlocked it and I pulled out $800 in like $1 in coin rolls. And I was like, "Here you go. This is for the tires." But then I was smart and said, "But I'm leaving a post-it note that says you owe me the amount." And then I put it back in the box and shut it.
did,
And I had that
did
box forever.
did they ever pay you back, or
Oh
did you ever
yeah,
see
they
that
did
money?
with
Yeah.
with interest. But then they took it
Really?
back again. Oh yeah, no, for sure. I was like, yeah, what are you gonna do to like, yeah. So it was good. So I learned a lot of my business mindset just from
Yeah.
watching my parents and then wanting to overcome it so we wouldn't be in that scenario again.
Mm.
It's like it's really cool. So growing up in the RV was, just so much about adventure and then learning to be resourceful and creative and a little bit of like I love the word chaos. I think it's a beautiful word. I don't think it's a bad thing. When you're pursuing something that makes you really happy, that chaos is a beautiful thing. When
Hmm.
it's chaos, when you're in a life that you don't want to live, then it's not seen as a good thing. But like that chaos of my childhood was like such a beautiful thing because people were really passionate about what they were doing and they were truly happy. So it was like beautiful, organized chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. How much do you remember of your pre-RV days? Like, do you have
I remember
memories?
quite a bit. Yeah.
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 Did
I
you
do have quite a bit of memories.
I mean,
Yeah.
did you have any feelings of resentment of like having to leave your friends, having to leave your bike behind?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
were there
No, for
so
sure.
like
At the
pain
time, I
from
was
that kind of
pissed.
separation? Yeah.
I wouldn't say I have any necessary pain from that separation. It was gone pretty quickly because we would roll up to Washington, D.C., and I was a kid that lived in an RV, and I had all these adventures to tell my friends. I was just on a Maine salmon trip like 2 weeks ago with the same kids from that town in
No
Maryland.
way.
So yeah,
That's awesome.
so because they were the only like growing up in an RV, I wouldn't have, so I held on to my friends from DC. And my
Hmm.
parents made sure at Halloween, sometimes we'd go do Halloween with them. But on top of it, I think a big part of it was I showed up and I got to tell them these stories of what we did. And they put me, just from being a part of the stories, on this like pedestal. "You went where? You did what?" And then I'd show up and my dad would have hot pink hair, and their dads were all lawyers and doctors who would never ever have hot pink hair, and they thought it was the coolest thing ever. They were like, and my mom was definitely, we were the hippie family for sure. My friends still talk about it today. They're like, "Do you remember when we slept over in the RV and your mom was walking back and forth naked as if it's not a big deal?" I was like, "Oh yeah, she does it all the time. What's the problem? Your mom doesn't do that?" And they're like, "No." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, your dad doesn't have hot pink hair?" "No." And I was like, "Okay." And it became like, I don't know, it just made me feel special, unique. And so I didn't have a lot of resentment. And I don't look back thinking that was a mistake at all because the household was just so much happier, like almost overnight.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So there really was no feeling of like I missed out on some of the traditional things that kids did. It sounded like it was more like, wow, look at all the things they're missing out on that I get to do.
Yeah. I think if they didn't keep us so busy, then there would have been space to have those feelings. But we were
Mhm.
so busy going everywhere all the time with nothing. To this day, my lifestyle does not slow down. I mean, I am in White Salmon, Washington. I do have a house in Tennessee, but I might sleep in my house in Tennessee 60 nights in the year. That's
Hmm.
about it. So,
Wow.
like, when you keep yourself so busy, it's really hard to have feelings of like, what would it look like elsewise? And, I'm raising children myself and I worry about that. Like my daughter loves gymnastics and so forth. Well, I take advantage of any opportunity I can to take her to those things. And as a kid, for me, I miss my friends, but my parents found ways for me to connect, with other people. And Dane was my best friend, so it worked out really well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it says a lot about how you feel about that, given that you've adopted a lot of the same mentality and
I
just
know. It
lifestyle that
wasn't
your parents
intentional.
did.
I swear I wasn't going to be my parents, but here I am in a van down by the river once again. Yeah. Funny how that happens. Yeah.
I mean, do you ever question, like, I wonder what it would have been like if I went to college, if I was like hanging out in New York at some penthouse party talking about like architecture or something? Like, do you ever ask
Yeah.
yourself like, what if I went a different route, or does it not
It's so
even
funny
cross
that
your
you're
mind?
asking me this because I'm totally reading that book, The Midnight Library, where this woman basically tries to kill herself, and she's held in limbo. And she receives this book, but she's like dead. She's in a coma. She received this book, and inside the book is a book of regrets. And then with all the regrets, she can ask this librarian basically, I want to see what my life would have looked like had I not done this. And then she gets to live it out for like a few days, and then it's just so funny how everything's intertwined, or when you want something you're missing out on something else. And so I think it's really funny that you asked me that question, like looking back how things would change. I feel insanely educated through travel. I think it is one of the best education anyone can get. And so I can hold myself in a room a lot better than I think I would have had I gone to college. And I have a lot more confidence in my capabilities because I've been kidnapped and all these random things that people don't want to have in their lives. But everything's kind of taught me a lesson to be resourceful, to be creative, and yeah, regret is not a word that we play with in our household at all. There's just no space for it because there's nothing in that word that's going to help us live a better life tomorrow. So, like,
Yeah.
if there's something that I feel like I'm missing or that I missed in my childhood, I will do everything I can to implement that moving forward. So, like, I've taken like 12 different online college courses because I always played that I really would love to have gone. I'm really good at school. I graduated high school at 16. I was a straight A student. Dane never graduated high school because he didn't like school as much as I did.
Hmm.
But it was one of those things where I really enjoyed school and I did a really good job. So I always wondered that. But then when I started homeschooling my kids, I would say, hey guys, we're all going to do school together. And I would open up my computer and I'd be doing London Business School or some Stanford
Hmm.
courses and on Coursera, which is like a great platform where you can take full courses at like a fraction of the price. And you
Right.
don't get a diploma or anything, but you do get you actually get a certificate that links into your LinkedIn account. And it's just fantastic because like that to me was a piece that I agree. Like I thought, this is missing, but I found alternative ways to make it happen. And I'm probably more proud of the way that I did it and approached it than I would have been otherwise. So,
What kind of
but who
courses have you
knows?
Yeah, what kind of courses
Yeah.
have you taken? What was your interest?
I have a bunch of different ones. Some psychology. I've taken a lot of business ones, a lot of marketing ones, branding ones. I took some on, physical science, different things, like just a lot of different things. I don't know. It gets broad. The psychology ones were probably some of my favorite. And then I work with a therapist now who studied a lot with like brain mapping and stuff. And so I'm very interested. Like I find a lot of um, like that connection points of how people's brains work and like how you make decisions and so forth very intriguing. So like for me, that definitely like piques interest. Like Dane and
Hmm.
I are like we come from the same people, but our brains are hardwired so different. So it's like interesting to me instead of
Hmm.
being like frustrated with decisions that other people make, like my brother choosing to throw himself off a practically 200-foot waterfall. It's like more trying to understand like how what makes him him and those connection points. And I find it, yeah,
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah.
I did want to like chew on that idea a little bit about like what you kind of brought in to your own life that was different from how your parents raised you, because
Uh,
I've heard from like, I guess, friends that know you,
Okay, yeah.
or I'm
Curious
just an
what's gonna
outsider,
say.
right? Like I
All
don't know
yeah.
anything else. But no, I've heard stuff like, and it might be interesting for people to realize too, like how much of a role you played in Jackson Kayaks and building
Yeah,
that business.
yeah.
But I've heard that like in your family, you're really the responsible business person. It was kind of like,
Okay.
in many respects, like you were raising your parents, teaching them how to run a business and
I
that
don't
kind
know.
of thing.
I'm not
Like
allowed to say that, but you said it.
that's right.
Uh,
You could just
no,
nod.
I could not. I could. I'm smiling and nodding for those that can only hear me. No, no, for sure. I found out. Well, so my mom had me when she was 20, and she ran away from New York City with my dad. And my dad was like 26 at the time, but my dad's still a kid today, like 100% through and through. And so people refer to me, even my father is like, "You're too serious," like lay back, especially if he's been drinking or something. He just loves to give me shit, and he's like, life doesn't have to be a burden at all. You can just let everything go, be a little more reckless. And I'm like, oh my God, Dad, like if only you knew. But I would have to say that I felt like I watched my parents and felt like I could have both things. I could have a little more stability because I think for me, I'm just a different person than they are. My dad loves living on the edge of a blade, like you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Like he thrives in that environment. And that's what makes him such a good competitor. Like when things
Mm,
are really stacked against him, he is like breaks out like Superman. He throws the glasses off and he is Clark Kent. Like that is just how it works. But if he's not pushed into these really difficult situations, he doesn't get to have the chance to impress himself. And so without that challenge, he doesn't get to see the best versions of himself. And I agree with that. So I've taken a lot of physical activities. I've run ultra marathons just to feel that same thing that I've watched my dad do. I've competed on a world stage and I've won multiple world championships. Because it's true, like the more pressure and the harder things are, it gives you the opportunity to impress yourself more. But at the same time, day to day, there are certain things that I want more routine and stability in. And the big one for me was finances because I was 8, but I definitely remember my friends had access to a lot more things. They didn't have the adventurous lifestyle, and everyone definitely wanted, more of the adventure that we had. But I also got to see the times where my mom was stressed out because we didn't have dinner, or I got to see my parents broken down because we didn't have tires. And I got to see these scenarios, and I thought to myself, is there a way for me to like push myself and have the life that I want to live, but also find a way to not have to wake up in the middle of the night wondering if I was going to have food tomorrow or what we were going to do? Because to me, that just made me really frozen. So I don't think I would have
mm,
grown as a person if I didn't recognize that within myself. And it did take time. I'm a giver. I want to take care of people. I was like, well, I can't take care of people if my cup's empty. So that's what
mm.
really fueled my business mindset and really helped me out a lot. And a lot of it I learned from spending some time writing my own obituary.
Really?
As a project. I did one of the
Do you want
classes I
do
was
you want to read?
taking.
Do you want to read it to us?
No, no,
No.
it's private, but I can give you with the one thing I learned. And so, like Nick and I, my husband and I would disagree on certain things, but one thing that I learned is that I am not the happiest version of myself. And at the end of the day, the thing that determines whether or not I feel successful is whether I push myself outside of a comfort zone in any way, mentally, physically, anything.
Hmm,
Lately, I do a lot of physically, so like CrossFit, but
mhm,
the other piece of it that I found really interesting is that if I don't do something like an act of kindness or make someone feel like I'm there to support them, then I don't feel like I've succeeded in that day. I'm a very giving person. And so to me, that means calling my grandmother. That means, giving money,
hmm,
buying a drink for a homeless guy on the street. I keep
hmm,
bars in my car to hand off to people. I have like a group of individuals that have allowed me to love on them, so I can fill that cup up. So I have teenagers that come and live with us in our RV because they can't afford to go to the kayaking events. And
hmm,
so, as far as like carrying it forward, I learned a lot of that from my parents. But the biggest thing that I've tried to change is to be a little bit more financially stable. And what part of that meant, doing a little bit more planning, I'm a little less present, I would say, than my parents were at times. So like
Mm,
they definitely embodied being present way better than I do. And I'm definitely the person that is trying to weave a net instead of just leaping.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
that makes a
I'm
lot of
not sure if it's a
sense.
good thing or a bad thing. We'll find out. We all like go too far one way from our parents. So we'll see how screwed up my kids are. Everyone needs something to go to therapy for. So we'll see. I mean, maybe I am too strict. I'm not really sure, but luckily Nick and I balance each other out. And I have my family to remind me, to every once in a while, you just got to do something fun and wild. And in our family, it's hard not to do that. So
It would seem so,
yeah.
considering the circles you run in and everything too, right? Like,
Oh, for sure. For sure. Constant. Yeah, definitely.
yeah, yeah. I don't know what else to explore in that. I mean, I did want to ask you what how you feel about raising your own kids. You kind of dipped into that some.
How I feel.
Uh,
Like,
yeah, I
well,
mean, I guess
yeah,
your philosophy on it, like what you want to bring to them that's different from your upbringing, and yeah, I mean, I guess you started to
yeah,
tap into that. Like,
yeah. No,
how are you approaching kayaking with them?
how am I pushing kayaking with them?
Hmm.
So, different than my parents, that's for sure. My dad would just put us in a boat. He was just like, "This is what you're doing, do it," and you had to listen, or else you were in trouble. Like that's just how. Like it was a respect thing. And I would cry every time I got in the boat. I hated kayaking because everyone thought I was going to be this amazing kayaker, and I was just a little girl that was scared of kayaking. And my own fear of failing my dad and failing myself was so high that it just made it not fun. Like I couldn't overcome that anxiety of disappointment. And knowing that, it's crazy because I have an 11-year-old son who is identical to me in so many ways. He's soft spoken, he's a giver, he overthinks everything. He'd make an amazing lawyer, he can argue to the death if he wanted to. And it's logical too. Like he wins most of the time, even though arguing is not allowed in our house. Um, he but he getting him into kayaking, I was like, you know what, I'm not going to push my kids to kayak at all. But my dad's philosophy is that it's like a tribe mentality. So if your kids are surrounded by people that are kayaking all the time and they see them having fun and that's just what the tribe does, the person gets into kayaking or
Makes sense.
being in the water one way or another. And that's kind of what happened with our son. But in this last year, he's gone through puberty and he's 5'1", and he has that like additional testosterone, and he has really I'm like, okay, maybe he's not my son. Like he's not just identical because he's definitely way more confident than I was at a young
Hmm.
age, and he's way more like enthused and pushing it harder. So he has like evening FaceTime calls with Dane every once in a while, like, so I tried my blunt and this is what happened, and I can't give him
Wow.
any advice. Oh yeah, I can't. And he waves that around all the time, like with his buddy. He has a Facebook group on like a kids messenger that I let him talk in with like four other kayaker kids that are his age, and
Mm,
listening to the four of them is like the funniest thing you'll ever hear. So I prioritize finding kids around his age, and that really fueled getting my kids into kayaking. But at the same time, that did not exist when I was a kid, simply due to the fact that my dad made kids kayaks, the very first kids kayak, because Dane was so little and I was
sure.
already 14 at the time. So um, that definitely transition. Like I didn't have that accessibility. I did not meet up with groups of kids as a child kayaking. But anytime I had the opportunity, even if it was a kid that had never been in a kayak, but it's like someone's kid that I know, I just made the opportunity for Tucker to kind of be that like shining star of the situation. Like, oh, this is how you do it. And by making him feel confident, he like really pushed himself. And so I'm really proud. And my daughter is a nightmare to teach kayaking to because she's totally confident underwater, but she hates a strong word. She refuses to pull her skirt. She'll just hang out underwater forever.
Whoa,
And so there's been like times in like rapids where I'm like, I'll count to like 15, which is a long time because
that's a long
I
time.
want her to panic and I want her to pull her skirt. And I'm like, I count to 15, I roll up and she's like, hi mom. And I'm like, damn you. And I was like, my heart
Wow.
raced like way up here. And I was like, I told you to put your skirt. She's like, I was just hanging out. It's way more work when I swim. It's easier if you just roll me up. So just roll me up faster next time. I'm like, yeah, no, I need to know that you know what happens if I like passed out or something. I couldn't roll you up. Oh, that won't happen. I'm like, oh my God, this is so much pressure on me, to teach them. I was like, that's the part that gets me is that teaching the
Yeah.
kids is one thing, but like that pressure of being a parent and like doing it right and protecting them is like kind of scary. It's exciting, but it's also, I share that with a lot of people I trust. So when I go kayaking with my kids, I usually invite like 4 really good friends because I'm like, I need to share this load. I can't do it by myself. So, and they totally understand it and they love it. So it's great.
But it
Yeah.
sounds like it is important to you to teach your kids to kayak. Like you want them
Yeah.
to learn, or
I want them to engage in, well, I don't think that they would be as connected with nature. I think the river has a lot of important lessons to teach. You know, you're never on the same water twice ever in your life. So you have to learn to be present and you have to learn to adapt. And you have to learn to drive yourself in the places that you want to go. And I think the river is like the perfect place to be learning those lessons. So it's not necessarily the kayaking that is so important to me. It's about what the
Mhm.
river and kayaking can teach
What it
them. I
brings.
really want them to have those life lessons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Does it? Do you have that fear, especially? Well, I mean, I guess this gets
Yeah.
into something else I'd like to talk about. But
Yeah.
do you have that fear, like especially with your boy, who's all fired up now, and it's like
Hmm.
sounds like he's ready to start stepping it up more,
Oh,
like
seriously. Yeah.
that you're gonna get it. I mean, because like you just told me, like I wish Dane wouldn't go running, like 200-foot
Hmm.
waterfalls. I mean, you might, and I know, like when he was a kid, right? I think I remember reading something where he had like a near drowning experience or something. Like he
Hmm.
obviously is doing stuff
Yeah.
that is dangerous. Like, do you have that
Hmm.
fear for your family, for your kids, for your brother?
Well, I think all of us take life for granted. We could find out we have cancer tomorrow. We could get hit by a car tomorrow. You know, that. So I think when you're approaching something that's perceived or can be, considered dangerous, like an extreme sport like kayaking, there's this anticipation. Well, how are you comfortable with that? And the thing that lets me sleep at night is understanding that there's a stark difference between being alive and living. And if there's a group of individuals I've ever met in my entire life that embody what it means to like to truly be living, it would be kayakers. And I think it's the lessons that the rivers teach them. So with Dane, and honestly, when I first started dating Nick, we were young. I was 16, he was 18, and he went on the first expedition down the Alsa Seca. He was the first group to ever go down this section of whitewater, and he
Mm-hmm.
was with famous expedition paddlers at the time, Ben Stokesbury, Jesse Coombs, that whole
Mm-hmm.
crew. Nick had never gone creeking before, ever, like almost
Wow,
never in his life. And he had an almost death experience there. But
really?
one thing that
Where
I
where was it?
in
Do
a
you know what?
cave on the Alsa Seca. Yeah,
Do you know what
he went
drop it? Was that the like classic like
the
big banana
cave.
section
Yeah,
there?
the classic big banana section. Yeah, he swam and then got pushed up against the undercut wall
Mm.
and had to like Spider-Man, he said, is Spider-Man his way out, is the way he described it.
Wow.
And with him, it was scary and it like made him respect the river more. Like we always talk about respecting the river. But at the same time, the one thing that I think my mom kind of taught me, and then in general, the thing that I repeat to myself, and I've been telling Dane's wife this as well, is that if we keep them from pushing themselves or becoming the person they want to be, we're just killing them slowly. Like then we'd be
Mm.
like cancer, we would be attacking them or the very base of
Mm-hmm.
who they are. And so for a lot of these kayakers and my kids and everything else, if it turns into a piece of their identity and it's who they are and what they need to do to feel alive, then I would be killing them by keeping them from it. And so it's the only thing that I can tell myself that makes me feel okay with what Dane does.
Mm.
And then other thing is dedication to pushing herself and making logical choices. And so Dane is very safety conscious. My whole family is very safety conscious in what they do. And we've all made mistakes and we've all had scary experiences, all of us. Nick's almost drowned. I had a really scary experience when I was only 10.
Mm.
My kids haven't been there yet, but like today, my son hit his head for the very first time in a rapid. And he's like, that
Mm.
never happens. I was like, you've only paddled big water. Like, you have to understand. And he's like, but it's only class 3. How could a class 3 hurt me? And I was like, dude, flat water can hurt you if you mess it up bad enough. And he's like, oh, okay. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting trying to navigate that because I think, like I said, it's just you have to recognize that not letting people embrace who they are, push themselves, is just another way to kill them.
Yeah. I can tell you've
Hmm.
thought a lot about this But
Yeah, it was a hard year. Dane, we lost Bren Orton in the last year, and the day that Bren Orton passed, which was really hard on my family because we had just spent 10 days with him in Mexico for Dane's wedding. And this was like maybe 5 days later. And Dane was actually supposed to fly out and be paddling with Bren like another 3 days after that. Um, I put my whole family in the river that day. Like we got the news that he passed
mm,
away, and I loaded the kayak gears. I was a wreck. Nick was a wreck. We were all like confused, very confused because we were just talking about life goals with Bren and everything,
mm,
and it didn't make any sense. None of it made sense. And for some reason, like almost like a zombie, I just went and I loaded even Parker, and it's freezing. Like we were in Colorado in May, and it was freezing outside. And I just loaded
mhm,
her kayak, her own paddle. And Nick's like, is she paddling by herself down this section? I was like, yep. Everyone's in their own boats today. And he's like, what are we doing? And I was like, if we don't get them in the water today, I'm gonna have anxiety over it, or I'm gonna create some demon. I need to
mm,
see like the beauty in the kids paddling on their own, and like how amazing that is right now, or otherwise it's going to be a nightmare. And he was like, solid point, let's do this. And it was a beautiful day on the water as
yeah,
a family. So definitely have spent a
yeah.
lot of time thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting reaction.
Yeah.
I like that though, trying to like let's remember why this is beautiful and why we
Yeah.
do it. And,
Grab the
yeah,
bull by the horns. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
um,
I love how you
yeah.
smirk right before the question sometimes. I'm like, oh, what is he going to ask me next?
No, no.
I'm like, oh. Yeah.
I was going somewhere else with my
Okay.
brain, but we talked about. I'm going to change gears entirely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we talked
Okay.
about this a little bit, but like you mentioned how one of the things you realized was really important to dedicate your life to is kind of generosity and service and stuff like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
And like I actually, I got introduced to you through Jesse Stone, who like has just done
He's the
amazing
most
things with her
generous
life.
person. Yeah.
Yeah,
Most
like
generous
incredible,
person
right?
ever. Yeah.
Yeah, I did the. If people haven't listened to that podcast, they totally should. Like, she's just
Hmm.
seems like just an incredible person. But yeah, and I actually just heard. I just talked with Pedro Oliva recently,
Yeah.
um, who was also just an amazing guy. And he
Yes.
like I was actually asking him about how he met Ben Stooksbury, and then before he told me that, he started talking about like, let me tell you about EJ, how I met him. And it was like,
Yeah.
and he basically said, he met him in Ottawa, and like EJ basically just took, I think it was, early on when he started Jackson Kayaks, right? And like he gave him his creek boat. He's like, it
Hmm.
sounded like he's just like, you need this more than I do, and just drove away to start a summer tour without even a creek boat, which sounds, kind of in line with the stories you've told about your dad and how like, but that struck me as just like, wow, like what an amazing generosity, because I'm sure he didn't have anything either, right? Like, yes, he had a kayak
Hmm.
company, but it's probably had like no money from it at that point.
No,
And
not
it
at
was,
all.
and so like clearly you've pulled some of this from your parents and like seen their example. But what and the other thing that struck me from Jessie was that she was telling me how your family was involved in building the clinic in Uganda, like literally from the
Yeah.
ground up, like nails
Yeah.
and
Laying
hammers and
bricks. Yeah.
everything.
The only
Yeah.
time I've laid bricks in my life, but yeah.
But I thought
No.
that was pretty cool because I guess I don't, like your family's out on social media a lot, but I don't hear a ton about like the community stuff you do. Like, what can you talk a little
Hmm.
bit about kind of like as a family, as a person, as a company, like what you try to do to prioritize that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there are so many different ways to give, like, to be generous in general, but my dad, I mean, the most valuable thing in the world is time. And like, there's nothing you can't monetarily put a price on time ever. So for me growing up, it was like there were different things that were seen as being generous. So, for example, my mom is a phenomenal cook, and a lot of kayakers were hungry and they were living out of their cars and peanut butter and jellies, and they just didn't have good food. And my mom fed all of them. There's like not a kayaker that I know that hasn't been fed by my mother at some point. And there's something to be said about the time that went into making the food and then giving them the food and having them at our table, like that this is our
Mm,
space and we want you part of it. And it really transformed a lot of people's lives, like watching people talk about what my parents did. Oh, well, they drove me here, or they gave me a place. And I was like, but we didn't even have a place. Or, my dad giving away a boat and then not, like you said, not necessarily having any money. to replace that boat. But that's exactly the kind of people that they were, just what can I do to elevate all the people around me
Mm.
while trying to elevate my own life. And Jessie Stone is a great example of that. She just wanted to become a better kayaker. And my dad was coaching her. And before this is before the clinic or anything, Jessie Stone was on the U.S. team for freestyle kayaking. At the time, she wasn't, but she was this cute younger girl, as my mom likes to say. He was like, "I'll just go kayaking everywhere you go kayaking, EJ, and in return, I'll offer your family, medical support." My mom was like, "Don't like her. I don't know if this is gonna work. She's not allowed to hang out. She's too cute." And I was like, well, this is confusing. But then it was like 2 days later, Dane totally cracked his head open and needed stitches. And we didn't have money. And it was like Jesse was right there stitching
No
up
way.
Dane on our couch, like
It's like it was
immediately.
meant
We
to
have
be.
so
Mm.
many pictures of him getting stitched up by Jesse Stone over my life, so many. And so, but there was like one thing after another. And I really think that when you're generous with people, you can't determine with a random person on the street, you can never expect anything to come back out of it. But I think the only ways to like get ahead in life at times are often by being generous. It gives other people the opportunity to help elevate you as well. And so like the more generous you are, the more support you have in different areas of your life. And so like watching my parents just be so generous to different people, that generosity, if my dad never said yes to Jesse, like for coaching in return for medical support, then Jackson Kayak would have never started because Jackson Kayak was founded by Jesse's friend, like the financial
Hmm.
supporter, backer.
Yeah.
And so little pieces like that, I think it really
Yeah.
comes full circle, but you don't know, you can never connect dots moving forward. You can only ever connect dots looking back. And so if you don't know how to connect them moving forward, then by being generous, it just gives you the opportunity to have a much better support system. So for me, what I try really hard is to elevate as many kayakers as possible to pursue their passion. So at Jackson Kayak, we have the biggest team. I use Jackson Kayak's resources to give them gas to events, try to come up with jobs for them. But then monetarily, when I can't do that, I use them all as interns to teach them about project management, social
Mm.
media, wherever they are in their life and what they're engaged in. I'm like, well, I can't give you anything, but I can help educate you on some of these things. And then on top of it, with Soft Power Health and working with Jessie Stone in Africa, I learned very early on that a little bit can go a really long way. So in Uganda, I can backtrack for a second. When I was 14, I won the GoPro Mountain Games in Dale, Colorado. And all the other senior women were really angry because I won $3,000 and I didn't need it because I was a kid in their eyes, and they needed it because it was like supporting them. And so I was really hurt by this because I won, but they didn't want me to have the money. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I was like, well, maybe I can donate it somewhere. But my parents needed the money too at the time, but they were like, that's a great plan. Let's make a plan. And Jesse was like, I have some ideas. And we used that money that I won and then another event that I won to launch a fundraising campaign for Soft Power Health in Uganda. And by
Hmm.
using my passion for kayaking and my prize money, I raised over $60,000 and I
Wow.
split it between Soft Power Health and Soft Power Education at the time. And the coolest thing was my $6,000 paid for the salary for her first doctor at the clinic for an entire year. And so here I am, like a 14-year-old, being like, I pay for a doctor at a clinic for an entire year. It was so empowering. I was just
Not
like,
many
people were
people
like,
can say
what the hell? I know. I was like, I love saying it still. But I was only 14 at the time. People were like, what are you talking about? And it was just unbelievable to them. And you're like, well, the salary there is like $6,000, which is still a lot of money. But at the same time, it's people can do a lot more in different areas, but we're not exposed to ways to give back, or we're waiting for this moment to make a bigger impact, not necessarily recognizing that it's the day-to-day things that
that.
send more consistent ripples out into the world. If you try to make a splash, eventually it's going to be the same ripples. But if you
Hmm.
are constantly sending little ripples out into the world, I truly believe it has a much larger impact in the end. So for me, it's been working at Soft Power Health, hiring people and working with people at Jackson Kayak, housing people at my home constantly. And then as far as like my dad, it's the same thing. It's like my dad's biggest thing with being generous is helping people see the value and pursuing things that make them happy, prioritizing things that make you
Mhm.
happy. And my dad is really good about communicating with people about that it's never too late to like pursue passions. And he's 60 now, and he's very generous with his time with others to ensure that, you know, that yeah, things are challenging, but at the time you just have to do what you love, otherwise why are we doing this at all? That's his perception. So very generous family. And then for myself, it's just what can I do today? I bought my friend was working at her house today, and I asked Nick, and I was like, can you go to this restaurant while he's running my shuttle too? I was like, I'm going kayaking, but you're going to go to the bakery, you're going to pick up this salad, and you're going to drop it off at my friend's house because she's been really busy with work and keeps forgetting to feed herself. And then Nick was like, okay. And then, it just made her feel supported. And so, I try to do something like that every day. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
my
no,
calling, I
those
guess.
those are great thoughts. Yeah, and I like that. I've heard that idea before that I really like is that just sort of doing what's good for others ultimately ends up being what's good for you too.
Hmm.
Right? Like it's
100%.
you're not doing it for selfish reasons, but kind of just
Hmm.
following those
Hmm.
values ends up
Yeah.
ultimately
And I think
working
if we're
out for you
talking
as
about
well.
it too much, it gets lost. Like it loses its why are we doing it? But I think it's also important to talk about it in a way to inspire others to do things as well. So I think people get kind of cross, like, why am I doing this? Or how do I approach this? And generally, I think it's just if you can think of something kind to do, like writing a letter, making a phone call, calling someone you haven't talked to in a while, saying, I love you. I say, I love you so freely. Nick's like, dude, did you just say I love you to another man on the phone? I'm like, maybe. Like, he's like a little brother to me. Come on. And he's like, I would never say I love you to another woman. And I was like, oh my God, we'll have this conversation
Little
later. But
jealousy there.
I
Yeah.
know it's okay. I love it. So,
Well, you reminded me that I skipped over something in our conversation that I don't want to let drop, which is kind of gender roles.
yeah.
And and I joked about it in your intro, but it's
Yeah.
like really true in kayaking. I mean, when I go kayaking, I don't I you know I can count on like one hand, right? Like how many women I tend to see on the water. It's
We have
all
to come to White
guys.
Salmon right now because you'll be outnumbered for sure.
I've heard that there's quite a
Yeah.
group up there. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a
but
posse.
Colorado is not as progressive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if that's one way to frame it. No, I think there's a lot of different concepts that people think, why is there more guys than girls in kayaking? And there is no right answer, and no one knows why. But a big piece of it is people respond to adrenaline different. A lot of guys get a really big high after adrenaline, where it's like, they get fired up. It's like going coursing through their veins, or it's like, yes, I did this. But a lot of times that spike in adrenaline in a female can bottom out way more aggressive. So instead of it just being like a spike and then coming back to your like happy place, it keeps going down and down until you're like super distressed and anxious and not happy. Like it's not a positive thing anymore. You lost the like high into an extreme low. And so one thing that kayaking has done really poorly is portrayed the other benefits of getting out on the water, for starters, and then on top of it, portraying the bunny slope. It's seen as extreme. This is an extreme sport. What we do is
Hmm.
we push ourselves and we do these hard things, and that transition from like I just learned how to kayak into running hard things, like when you first get into kayaking, all you see is these hard things, and you're like, well, where's the middle? And it's not relatable. And I think women in general really look for things that they can relate to. So one, it's seeing more women, but then on top of it, seeing something that they feel they can overcome. And what our sport promotes most of the time is not something that is a logical leap for most people getting into kayaking. And while it may fire up a lot of boys, it has the opposite effect on a lot of females. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we face in it. But on top of it, I think it can be kind of exhausting when you're the only female all the time and you don't feel like you're given the right space. There are women that are like trying to approach that. Like you can cry on the river. And while I think that's a very positive message to state, a lot of women also get into it because they want to push themselves and they want to feel proud and strong and so forth. So it's like we're caught between like the extreme feminism and then the extreme pushing ourselves. And that middle ground for ladies, I think, is just a wide open market that isn't, doesn't have enough support right now to get more ladies into the sport. And so it's a bummer. And I'm really excited to see a lot of energy going to continue to grow. There's ladies paddles everywhere. I'm here in White Salmon, and the men are outnumbered on the river almost every single day. On the lower sections of the river, the easier
Mm-hmm.
sections. And the reason being is because everyone's made that section cool now. They hop in an RPM or an old boat, and they're just,
Yeah.
fooling around, and they're having fun in the water and cooling off. They're seeing the other benefits of getting out in your boat, not just pushing the whitewater.
Do you think that's part
Yeah.
of the answer? I mean, do you think like some of the new boat designs, the half slices and everything are going to help change that? Because I know for me, it's like, yeah, once I've discovered I could go like paddle a half slice, I'm like, oh, this stuff that was boring is now super fun to do.
At 100%. But what you don't see is people promoting that as much, because they're like, it's not me pushing myself, so I'm not going to put it up on Instagram.
Yeah.
But those times, like, I like to think, what were the times in my kayak recently that had the biggest smile on my face? And for me, it isn't at the bottom of somewhere where I push myself really hard. It's with a great group of friends, a community paddle, and we're like totally fooling around. And if we can promote and push that and show people that this is what it's about. And my kids taught me that. Like, look at the birds, look at the trees, look at these different things around you, not just the kayak moving downstream. And I think it really opens up doors for it to be more relatable and more exciting for more people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, that
also, I
makes
think
sense.
fitness plays a role. So I'd like chime in on that real quick, because that is something I
Sure.
actually think is a big part. Most women don't just like wake up one day and decide that they're going to be a runner. A lot of these sports, climbing, it's like, oh, I want to look that way. I want to feel that way. I want strength. I want toned shoulders. I want this, that. And so, they get into running because they want to be leaner, or they get into, biking for cardio, or they get into climbing for shoulders, or initially it has some physical benefit to it that they think about. And then they fall in love with the sport, and then it becomes part of their identity. Kayaking doesn't have any of that promoted at all. The fact that it's an overall
Mm-hmm.
great physical sport, for your entire body. And so therefore, people aren't like, oh, I took this kayak class because I want to tone shoulders. I've never heard that ever, and I don't know if I ever will. But it's the truth. Like, if you're going to kayak, you're going to be strong. But
Sure.
no one talks about that at all.
Yeah, I wonder if a lot of that is just the size of the sport, right? It's just so
It's
like most
small.
people like
Yeah.
I walk around on the street and they don't
Yeah.
even know, right, what we're
Yeah.
doing.
No, for
So
sure. What is that thing on your kayak in a bright colored Tupperware container? Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you wanna leave a little time here to talk about Jackson Kayaks and what
Sure.
what
And you can
what you're up
decide.
to
Yeah.
these days? You are
Yeah.
the marketing director and
I am.
co-owner and all that
Yeah.
stuff for Jackson
Yeah.
Kayaks?
Yeah. And Werner. Um,
And Werner, yeah,
yeah.
tell me about that. What should we know about this, like Werner moving their factory and
Uh, the
being part of
acquisition.
Jackson Kayaks now? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, in general, there's two sides I can talk about, Jackson and Werner. But I think there's not one without the other now. They're kind of together, in for the long haul. So Jackson Kayak in general, we're committed. Like, all three of the owners, Tony Lunn, my brother Dane, and myself, are 100% whitewater kayakers. That's just what we do. And we're super passionate about making sure that we take care of the people in Sparta in our factory, and make sure that we're like elevating their quality of life. And then on top of it, making sure that we are making kayaks. And basically, the goal is to like pursue joy through kayaking. So encouraging everyone just to get out on the water, because we believe environmentally it's really important. And our whole structure of the business is like the three P's, but it goes in the order of people, planet, then profit. And so that's like the motto that we live by at Jackson Kayak. And so by having that like foundation of who we are really, it's a tight knit industry. And Joe Pulliam connected us with Bruce at Werner, because Bruce's challenges were manufacturing in the Pacific Northwest. And our challenges were that we have a really big factory. And then if we don't sell enough boats, there's a lot of empty space. But then on top of the empty space, with the seasonality of the business, it's really hard to maintain all of our employees. So it goes against our
Mm,
first initiative being people if we can't make sure that we are stable and keeping our people on. And so when Joe Pulliam kind of saw the two problems, he's like, it might be worth a conversation. Like, I don't know if you're interested in buying them, and I don't know if they're even interested in selling, but let's just have open-ended conversations. And that's exactly what we did. So we started having conversations about a year ago. It took 10 months of due diligence
Hmm.
for us to figure out if this was going to work, if we could pull it off. And then Jackson Kayak bought Werner paddles from the Fur family, who is the original Werners, because it was
Oh,
Werner and
really?
Martha Fur. And so the synergy between the two companies was really there. Like his passion was making sure that it was like run by people passionate about paddle sports first and foremost. Like we don't want this to be a corporation. We don't want the people just reviewing numbers and being like, well, this doesn't make sense, cut it, and so forth. It has to be like passion driven. And so with that, it just made sense. Like it kind of just fell into place,
Hmm.
and we ended up purchasing it. And then from there, yeah, we're just now, as of August, we have transitioned the entire factory into our home in Sparta, Tennessee. It's a big deal. Yeah. And because it's people, we did offer big packages to every single employee there with like compensation for traveling and moving and so forth and all these different things if they were interested, because that was a big concern of ours. And so we definitely approached that as the best of our ability. And we have several people moving from Washington to Tennessee, which is
Oh, really?
awesome.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
should we expect to see any changes in the product, or is the
They're
roadmap?
both legacy brands, so it'd be disrespectful, I think, to initiate any form of changes to what they have. I mean, Werner Paddles does make the best paddles on the market, and they perform really well, and we don't want to change that. We just want to make sure we're maintaining that and continue to grow and innovate. And then from there, we also have at Jackson Kayak, the same thing. It's constantly trying to innovate. We're using the boats every day. So for us, we want new toys. We want it to be fun, and so we change things constantly, but not without paying respect to the base of the brand. So most
Yeah.
consumers won't notice a difference to anything anytime soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the whitewater kayaks? Can you give us any hint as to what might be coming next?
Oh, coming next. Well,
Yeah.
every boat that we make is a prototype for the next one. So that's my line with that one there. No, I mean in general, we're constantly looking for, I think insight into what we're going to do next is constantly looking at what Dane's doing in his kayak, what he wants to be doing in his kayak, because we
Yeah.
want to make sure that we help elevate whatever it is he's looking for, but at the same time, we make our boats really easy, and I think that's one of Dane's secrets to success. He's like, I need the boat to be easy because I'm navigating hard whitewater. I don't need to be navigating hard whitewater and a hard boat. Like it needs to be easy to roll, easy to move. I'm like, all right, well, and that's what we'll do. And so Dane, just pay attention to Dane's Instagram in general, and it's a good insight into what we might do next. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good hint. That's a good hint.
Yeah.
Do you think that the market is more competitive for Jackson in the whitewater industry than it's been?
No, I mean, we've had majority market share for a long time. The competitiveness for us is maintaining specialty retail. Our goal is to make sure that we are elevating hubs in different areas for whitewater kayaking. So, for example, if we sold direct to consumer and the dealerships went out of business, then we would no longer have a place where people can get beta on the levels, schools, instruction, equipment they need. And so, the marketplace right now, the challenge that we have is that during COVID, for some odd reason, all the other companies got this idea that our sport grew by double overnight. And then what they did is they bought new ovens and they invested heavily to raise their capacity so high that it is not sustainable.
Really?
And so now they're all sitting on millions of dollars of kayaks in their warehouses. And so the challenges that we'll face have to do with the fact that there's only one place to go, and that's into market and below what it costs them to make it.
Hmm.
So price pointing, but at the same time, where is that money when you invest into these companies? Where does it go, and what can you do? That's the challenge that we're going to face into, is trying to convince people to support companies, but dollars to dollars, support companies that are investing back into the industry.
Hmm.
And that's a piece of it that's really hard, because people need to
Sure.
make money, and we don't want to see anyone go out of business, a dealer or another brand.
Sure. Sure.
And so they have to make decisions. But there's a lot of companies backed into corners right now. So going to be hard decisions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, exciting times, but I wish you the best on everything there.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
exciting. I mean,
yeah,
you can't have growth without conflict, so I'm sure there's a lesson in there somewhere. We'll figure it out. We'll do the best we can.
for
Yeah.
sure. Well, I feel like I've kept you away from your kids long enough,
Oh, you're
so
good. I feel like I saw something, but I think it was a dog. Yeah.
well, well, if you want to add the last subject that I had for you is
Yeah.
I didn't ever even knew about this until recently, but you have this YouTube channel, or no, I'm sorry, it's not a YouTube channel, a television show.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a Great
It's on
Family
YouTube
Adventure.
too.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Yeah. So Nick and I,
How
it's
did
actually on PBS
PBS?
and
Okay.
it's and Outside TV, which is pretty cool. And it's called Great Family Adventure. And it stumbled about because Nick said, I want to have a TV show one day. And he's all about manifesting. And friends of ours that used to be the world champion freestyle kayaker in 1998, Ken Whiting, owns a production company in Canada called Heliconia. And Nick said out loud enough, I want to have a TV show one day. And Ken was like, well, maybe I can help you do that because we run outdoor adventure television series that's a little bit different because the TV channels don't own it. So that means we can put it out everywhere. We own the show, and then whoever wants it can buy it at a really cheap price.
Hmm.
And so you're like, well, this sounds interesting. Let's try it out. And so we started a TV show, and now it's mostly adventure tourism. So we visited Jordan, in the Middle East, Banff, all these different places. And it's been pretty phenomenal. It's pretty fun. And the kids are learning a lot culturally, which is just amazing.
Hmm. Did you get those trips funded for you then? Do you get paid to do
If
that?
it's paid for by tourism, so like in Jordan, when we were visiting Jordan, Jordan tourism paid for our entire visit. Yeah. So
Oh,
it's 6 weeks out of the year that basically we live, almost for free, doing some pretty rad things. So it's pretty awesome.
yeah, getting paid to go on vacation. That sounds pretty good.
It's a lot of work, but looking back, it's always like the day after you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. And then like 2 weeks later, you're like, holy shit, that was so amazing. It's like, and you look back at it, it's just what my kids are spoiled rotten. They have no idea, how incredible. We were staying at like, the presidential suite in Banff, and it was $2,500 a night for the room we were in. And Tucker was like, my son was like, why don't we stay in rooms like this all the time? I was like, Jesus, he has no idea. I was like, dude, come on. I was like, I showed him the price. And he's like, yeah, so. And I'm like, okay, you have no idea, like, how hard we would have to work to pay for one night, forget for a week. So it's pretty awesome. Yeah, the TV show is great. You can definitely check it out on a Great Family Adventure. We do have some like tips and tricks for adventuring and kayaking with kids on our YouTube channel. And then outside of that, if you go to any of our channels, it's a Great Family Adventure on Instagram. And I'm just Emily Jackson Kayak on Instagram. And kind of shares, what we're up to and what we're doing next.
Cool. I have to ask you a weird question about this though.
Yeah.
I'll frame it. Don't take it the
Just go
wrong
for
way.
it. Weird.
Don't take
I'll
it the
take it
wrong
the
way.
wrong way. It's fine. No, I'm just
But
kidding. It's good.
yeah, like the Holcombs, right? Like they took a very similar track to your family, right? I knew
Yeah.
them when they lived out here in Colorado. They sold their house, they
Yeah.
sold everything. They've been touring around
Yeah.
in their RV. And
Yeah.
I saw Peter again, like, a couple years after he'd been doing it. And I was talking to my friend about
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I saw Peter. He's like having a great time doing this. And my friend had this comment that like he didn't like the I guess you'd call it the lack of authenticity of like what he did with promote, like because he had to do all these he's promoting Winnebago and he's promoting
Yeah.
all these brands, and so he gets on
hmm
YouTube and like has these
So you're
videos
trying to
where
like pivot this away from the fact.
life is great. Look at how cool
Yeah.
family is on the road and
Yeah.
everything. And like,
Mhm.
do you ever feel like there's something unauthentic about what you're doing, or it like cheapens you in
Mhm.
any way to like have to not have
Well,
to
I
is
already
the
have
wrong
the
word, but
solution to it. That's good. There's a solution to the issue that people see. You can't be promoting that life is good every single day and all these wonderful things you do if you don't balance it out with what reality is. And so for me and my channel, like Great Family Adventure is a business, it's a TV show. And so that platform's job is to promote the tourism side. But if you go and you want to know about myself personally, and that's why I've separated, like they asked if we could utilize my personal channel for Great Family Adventure originally because I had a lot bigger following. And I said no. And it was a big problem for them. They were like, I don't understand. And part of that's that reason. I am a very authentic person. Like I wear my heart on my sleeve and I will tell you everything, most embarrassing things, you name it, like all of it. because I figure if I'm voicing things out to the world, then nobody can hurt me. They can't hold it against me. My deepest insecurities, all of that, willing to
Hmm.
share it all. And the reason being is because if I say it out, no one can say it back. I share a lot of that on my channel, things I'm struggling with, business and so forth. Lately, I haven't been posting as much because I've been so busy. But in general, the way you balance it out is making sure that if you're going to spend all this time sharing about how wonderful your life is right now and these incredible things that you're doing, and these are your brand sponsors, you sure as hell better tell them why your days suck too. Because or else we're continuing to fuel this narrative of what is real for the younger society, because they can go back and look through all of it and be like, wow, look at this perfect life that Emily and Nick live, traveling with their kids everywhere on their free paid vacation. And a word that makes me gag all the time is influencer. Like, I hate that word. It does not bode well with me. And I really despise social media as a whole. But I've noticed, I've had people reach out to me about eating disorders in their daughter because of my own in the past. I've had people reach out and they've told me that by stumbling upon my account and reading something that I shared, that I had a deep impact on their life, because they couldn't believe that I would be bold enough to write that in front of everyone. And so if I was willing to do that, then they were willing to at least try and approach whatever they're struggling with. I'm talking miscarriage. I'm talking eating disorders. I'm talking about insecurities. I'm talking about deepest fears, by doing that, it really empowers other people to approach how to communicate openly about what they're struggling with, so people don't feel so alone. But you're right. If people do post the happy-go-lucky all the time, then we're kind of screwing society up to believe that that's a reality and something's wrong with us. And there's nothing wrong with us. It's just that we feel like we're supposed to keep our cards, so close to our heart, and that's not the case. You need to let them out, and that's where you get support. And so I feel very supported, and I also feel very authentic, and I don't feel like I'm, I understand why people feel like a lot of these social channels leave a bad taste in your mouth, and I'm right there with them. I agree 100%. You can't have it one way. If you're going to play that game, you need to be 100%. I argue with Nick about it all the time, my husband, because I'm like, you're so picture perfect on your Instagram lately. Can you just share something about the fact that you have traumatic brain injury or something about and he's like, no, I just need to do my post about my work. I'm like, that's fine. You do you, but it's not real. I'll post about your head then. He's like, don't do that. I was like, and that one freckle that you're uncomfortable with, and you're this and that. And he's like, oh my God. So it's one of those things, like, just be real. Like, social channel can be really powerful if you can just truly be real, and the way that I think about it for other people is they're using that to fund their dreams in their life, and it's just a tool to them. But that tool can have a lot of impact on perceptions. You have to be very careful.
Yeah,
that's like my deep dive. Way deep, and probably deeper dive than you meant for that one.
No,
but yeah,
that I give that an A for your answer. That's
okay. Thanks.
that's
I tried.
very,
I'm
very
gonna
good
go post
answer to
something
that.
embarrassing. Yeah, I'll go post
It's
something embarrassing tonight then.
it's funny
That's
that
good.
you mentioned influencer, because I was looking up the other night. I was looking up your Instagram, and I put in Emily Jackson, and the first one that came up was some like influencer that had like 500,000 followers or something. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, Emily's really popular. I didn't know
Yeah,
how
I
big
didn't.
kayaking was. And then
Yeah.
I look
I
at
was
it, it's
also, yeah, not me, but I was also a serial killer back in the day that was a prostitute serial killer. That was my favorite. I was like, when you look up Emily Jackson, if you're really careful, that is not me. I was not the prostitute that killed the man, I promise. So,
I don't know. Is influencer an upgrade or a downgrade from that? I'm not sure.
no, they're hand in hand. I'm not sure. That one girl sounds pretty badass though. She's so yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Emily, I can't thank you enough for taking so much time out of your day to talk. I've found it like
Fun.
wonderful talking to you, and I'm really excited
So
to
much
share it.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was awesome. Thank you for having us. I absolutely love the podcast. I think everything you're doing is awesome. I look forward to more stories. And if you decide that you want any of the other family members, just let me know. They won't be near as cool as I am, but we can give it a shot.
Yeah, well, we might have to slum it with some of the other family members at some point, just
All
because
right,
just
all right.
because
Well, you just let me know.
the
You
crowd is
just let me
asking for
know.
it.
Go for it then. I know some people. So.